Wizards have an interesting history in Smash Up, with a fair amount of unpredictability due to Neophyte and about 13 card draws, paired with 2 extra minion plays and 6 extra action plays. They brought a kit to core set that most of the other factions really needed. And of course, this comes at the cost of 7 minion power, which is a very large cost to pay, but the core factions tended to be so predictable that most of them were happy to pay 7 minion power to get this Wizards kit. And as a matter of fact, the first game of Smash Up I ever played, I saw the Wizards in this guy's box were marked as the cheaty mages with a bunch of other not very nice words. I don't remember whose box it was, but this player was not fond of playing against the Wizards because he felt like they cheated. And as they can seem like that, 13 card draws, 6 extra actions, 2 extra minion plays, that's a lot. And the Wizards will play a lot of cards. And that means that if you're trying to sit a base at 1 power beyond where your opponent can break the base and your opponent is playing Wizards, they play a Neophyte, and if the top card of their deck is an action, well, great, now the base just broke. On the other hand, they didn't stay as good as they were in core set. Throughout AL9K, they were pretty good. Ghost was a nice partner for them. Plants was able to search for Chronomage, which was fun. Cthulhu set isn't bad with Wizards, isn't great with them. Science Fiction Double Feature was also generally pretty good with Wizards, bringing in the Time Travelers. Spies had a little bit of synergy. Shapeshifters had a little bit of synergy, since Archmage is only 4 power. And after that, once we went from 20 factions in the game to 24 or 25, this is when Wizards started to decline a little. Because while there were newer factions that worked okay with Wizards, there were also a lot of newer factions that could provide some more card draw, some more extra actions, some more extra minion play of their own. New factions didn't have obvious holes in their kit, and because of this, Wizards didn't bring enough to newer factions that those factions couldn't do already in order to justify the loss of 7 power. We also saw a few more factions capable of countering the Wizards in some way. For example, I look at Monster Smash. Giant Ants loves the extra action from the Wizards, but unfortunately Giant Ants also has a bit of a hole of not being able to interact with opposing cards, and Giant Ants tends to want some non-power counter burst from its partners, and Wizards doesn't help a lot with any of those things. Vampires, on the other hand, straight up counters Wizards pretty well, because when you have 7 2-power minions, and you're facing a faction that loves eating 2-power minions to gain power counters, your 2-power minions get eaten. And similarly, the next few factions, while I can see some things that work nicely with Wizards, in every expansion, I'm seeing more things that do well against Wizards than with Wizards. And some Wizards steadily got worse and worse over time until it looked like it was really quite a bad faction, despite the fact that all its cards did the same thing that they'd already done, and other core set factions hadn't really gotten worse. So now we arrive at the point where Titan Kick comes out and Wizards get a Titan, and Wizards at this point are stronger than they ever were, even back in core set, because they've regained their crown as the king of card draw, and they've also gained an important amount of extra power back from Arcane Guardian. If they break a base around 6 to 8 cards in their hand, they've really got an extra 3 to 4 power from Arcane Guardian, and if they break 2 bases with Arcane Guardian, they're back up to being a 30-power faction. So the Wizards don't have a big drawback as long as they're able to play a Titan, and they tend to have gone from about a 13-card draw faction to more like an 18-card draw faction, while retaining all their old strengths. I feel, on one hand, like there isn't all that much to say about how to play Wizards, but at the same time, when I see other players play Wizards, I see a lot of tiny little mistakes that add up. So some of the important things to consider: Neophyte versus Enchantress, you can usually decide which one to play based on whether you might need an extra action play or whether you feel like you might need an extra card. Unless you have Portal, which should always be lined up with a neophyte in order to get yourself a draw and an extra action, and is one of your best cards in the deck. Outside of Portal, Neophyte is basically half a card draw plus half of an extra action. As far as Arcane Protector is concerned, unless you're playing with Ghosts, lining up Arcane Protector hands is going to be a very big deal. And it's important that you save Neophytes and extra actions, Chronomages, Archmages, Time Loops, and such in order to get Arcane Protector into play. One of the biggest differences between Wizards having a good game for me and Wizards having a bad game for me is by turn 2 or turn 3, can I line up a high probability Arcane Protector play. Often you can't line up a 100% Arcane Protector chance early on, and so you have to fire off with a 75% chance or something like that. This is going to be a very big deal for the kind of game you have because it can snowball for you. Archmage is a very important card, and you don't want to let it get discarded from play frivolously unless you're getting at least a victory point out of it relative to giving up something else. Sacrifice is something that you want to hold on to if you don't need to use it when the base deck is relatively small, because it's not great with wizard minions because they don't tend to be large, and also it's sometimes nice to get Cave of Shinies, because that's in the core set, and so it will be lurking somewhere in the base deck whenever Wizards are in the game, and it's nice to get the victory point. Don't walk face first into removal. When you see that you can break a base, don't just play the first sequence of cards that comes to hand that breaks that base. Ask yourself, how can I break this base, and either set up for the next base break, or break this base and have the strongest leave of remaining cards in my hand possible. Because that can make a difference when you're doing very well. That makes a difference between arriving at an end game where you have 11 or 12 victory points, one already, versus arriving at that end game and there's still a game of Smash Up to be played, and you might be on the worst side of that game of Smash Up. Also, summons are golden. You will often scry for summon or portal, and having summons left in your deck versus losing both your summons early and going through a long period of time before you can get a full reshuffle is often the difference between arriving in an end game and largely having the position won, and arriving in an end game and your opponents know that you can't do more than 4 power this turn. So be very careful with not burning your summons when you aren't getting a lot for them. I was all set to talk about a whole bunch of different potential partners for Wizards, and then I started scrolling down both of my lists, and I noticed that most of the Wizard partners do pretty much as expected. I don't see a lot of very strong synergies or very strong anti-synergies unless you started doing something obviously idiotic, like pairing Innsmouth with Wizards before the Titan pack, which ended up with so much missing power that you would get into a lot of trouble. One thing you do have to be aware of with the Wizards is they are a solitaire faction, meaning they cannot affect their opponent's cards in any particular way. So if you pair them with a second solitaire faction, you're going to get a deck that does not do well in 1v1 and does better in multiplayer. But here's some of the more interesting pairings I found. Ghost Wizards is very famous. It does well in both 1v1 and multiplayer because the ghosts are able to target opposing cards effectively and provide a lot of burst. And the ghosts love getting all that card draw so that they can fuel their cards that say discard X cards from your hand to do something that depends on X. One warning when playing this combination with the Titans: before you play Arcane Guardian, make sure that you know that you will be able to get Arcane Guardian back out of play before you need to play Cream Puff Man, because you have no way to get rid of your own Arcane Guardian. The converse of this is that if your Ghost Wizard's opponent plays Arcane Guardian and ends their turn with Arcane Guardian still in play, you should immediately ask yourself, can I trap this Arcane Guardian in play? Because even though I'm giving my opponent an extra card every single turn, it's still usually going to be worth it in order to cost them 5 points off of every Burst the Ghost attempt for the rest of the game, and to prevent any shenanigans involving multiple shady deals. So that's probably the most important single deck wrinkle I can think of for Wizards, is not to get your Arcane Guardian trapped in play when playing with Ghosts. Wizard Princesses turns out to be a little better than you might expect, because the Wizards are missing 5-power minions, the Princesses have nothing but 5-power minions. This is a pretty good combination together. Kaiju Wizards are also good, but even better are Kaiju against Wizards, because Wizards have so many 2-power minions. Wizard Plants. They are a solitaire deck, but they are fantastic in multiplayer. Other people have reported excellent results from Time Traveler Wizards. I haven't been able to duplicate these. I think it's the sort of deck that works better in some playgroups than others, but I also might just be bad at it. Innsmouth Wizards was absolutely horrible before the advent of Titans. Now it should be fine. Zombie Wizards and Ape Wizards both have performed well in multiplayer for me, but quite poorly in 1v1, because they're both, Zombie Wizards is completely a solitaire deck, Ape Wizards is almost a solitaire deck, and in both of those cases, an opponent can kind of predict what they're going to do on what turn. They tend to telegraph stuff. They tend to get in trouble against burst-oriented or various kinds of tactics that an opponent can pull in 1v1. But in multiplayer, where neither opponent can afford to concentrate solely on them, they can get a lot of power out, and they can do quite well.